доклад у нас Марк Reynolds, профессор Computer Science, университет Западной Австралии. Тема его доклада непрерывно ветвящееся время, если правильно. Значит, у нас регламент такой, 45 минут, но это вместе с дискуссией и вопросами.
Thank you very much. It is a great honour to be invited to speak here today, to speak as part of annual readings to commemorate such a famous logician as Smirnov. And I am very grateful to the program committee for inviting me, and also thank the audience for coming to listen. So thank you very much. I apologise that I will not be able to speak Russian. I also apologise that my version of English is an Australian version of English, and so it might even be hard for people who understand English well to understand Australian. But I'll try my best. Okay, so I'm going to talk, I made a slight change to the title from my original proposal. I want to talk about time, a model of time which is continuous in time and also branching. It doesn't have to be branching all the time or continuously branching. So the first title, continuously branching, is slightly wrong. We want time which is continuous and branching. Okay, so thanks very much to Moscow State University and my university, University of Western Australia, for helping me get here. I'm going to talk about a model of time which is continuous and branching towards the future. And this is a variant of Arthur Pryor's Occamist branch time logic of historical necessity. That's the history of this version of branching time logic. And we're going to look, mostly we'll look at an overview of the situation with these sorts of logics, the logics of historical necessity, and then this is partially a symbolic logic conference, so I'll also put some axioms, systems, and we'll talk about the completeness proof, but we won't go into great detail in a quite mathematical completeness proof. And there's some interesting aspects to the technical side of the logic. Okay, so I'll set the context, talk about bundles and limit closure, which are some technical aspects that come up in talking about this logic. We'll look at some axioms, briefly look at how the completeness, axiomatic completeness proof goes, and conclude. So I'm assuming some familiarity with temporal logic, but we'll start at the basics. Temporal logic, an extension of classical logic. What we're looking at is a version of propositional temporal logic. So we are imagining a set of propositions, the propositions which can change their truth values over time. So as time develops in a linear way, and possibly also when it branches, at different time points the propositions could be true, and sometimes at others they're false. This is the same as allowing different cryptic states of the world corresponding to different times. So you'll have a map, we'll have a structure of time, and we'll have a map from the times to cryptic worlds or cryptic states where propositions are true or false. And we'll start with some basic formal language for talking about such a situation, and we'll use Pryor's original F and P operators, which will be the case and was the case for the future and the past. And then we'll build up to more complicated propositions by using classical connectives and other connectives, so that we can be be able to say in our formal language things like, it will be the case that P holds even though P does not hold now. There'll be various variations of the logic as we go along, and well, there's lots of variations in temporal logic actually, sorry. There's lots of variations in temporal logic where you could start with intervals instead of points, you can have more powerful connectives, etc. You can have first order temporal logics, but this is we're in the setting of propositional temporal logic, which are a special type of modal logic. Hopefully people are familiar with modal logics as well. But unlike standard modal logics with a modality that corresponds to an accessibility relation, temporal logics will often have a pair of modalities, a forward-facing or one that faces towards the future and another one facing towards the past, that are in some ways complementary or opposite to each other. And in many temporal logics there's a symmetry between the past and the future. For example, if you think of time as a line going infinitely from infinitely in the past to infinitely in the future, if that's the model of time you want to talk about, then you've got a symmetry in time between the future and the past. Unlike a philosopher, I'm a computer scientist. I'm not making, I'm like a physicist, I'm a computer scientist. I'm not saying what the model of time should be. We just do reasoning with various useful models of time, and there are useful ones that are symmetrical, and there are also useful models of time that are not symmetrical. And when you come to combine temporal logics with other sorts of modal logics, often symmetries might disappear or be hidden. So for example, temporal logics can be combined with epistemic logic if you want to be reasoning about how knowledge changes over time. They can be combined with deontic logic if you want to reason about how obligations change in time. They can be combined with alethetic logic to reason about how possibility and time interrelate to each other. And if you start thinking about it, that's the combination we're going to be looking at, the combination of alethetic and temporal logic. The interplay of possibility and time, and the most intuitive model I'd suggest for that is the one which is a very sad one, but it means that as time progresses, we use up choices, and things become fixed, and options disappear in life. And that's the logic of historical necessity, which many people have looked at and reasoned about for thousands and thousands of years. Okay, a couple of thousands of years anyway. There's certainly evidence of it in Aristotle's time, and a lot of work in it in medieval Christian reasoning. So the logics we're going to, the area we're concentrating is this idea of historical necessity, which means it's a combination of time and possibility. We're reasoning about time and possibility, and we stipulate that there is, in this case, not a symmetry. There is not symmetry between the past and the future. Instead, the past is fixed from where you stand. What has happened cannot be changed, and the future is left open. I could be a little bit dangerous here and think that perhaps in some countries sometimes the past changes a little bit, but maybe I won't say that. Okay. Now, in reasoning about historical necessity, there's been a couple of different approaches that you can find the precursors of that in medieval times. You can possibly find it in Aristotle. You can certainly find it in early 20th century philosophy. And these two approaches were identified and developed a little bit more by the founder of temporal logic, Arthur Prior, who coined the names Occamist for one and Persian for the other, saying that the ideas for Occamist's version of historical necessity came from the work of William of Ockham in about the 13th century, but don't quote me on that. And the ideas for Persian logic of historical necessity came from C.S. Peirce in the early 20th century. And the differences are hard to summarise without getting formal, and we're going to get formal in a minute or two, but basically the Occamist idea is to keep a separation between the temporal connectives and the alethic connectives to do with possibility and necessity. And to keep that separation working, Pryor said that the Occamist idea that you needed to evaluate the truth of propositions at a pair, a semantic pair of objects. One is a point in time that you were speaking, and the other part of the pair is a history through time, through the branches of time that you imagine is going to be the actual one, or the one you're talking about at the moment. So if you make a statement relative to a certain imagined way that time is going to develop, and at a certain point in time, you can talk about what will happen and what might happen by talking about what will happen by looking ahead into the future along your imagined actual development of time. And you can talk about what might happen because you might, although you think something will happen, a certain way that the world will develop, there might be other options that are considered possible, branching off at various times. And so you can talk about what might happen as distinct from what will happen. And that allows us the Occamist approach. And we're going to concentrate in this talk on the Occamist approach. The Peircean approach, on the other hand, has some complicated combined connectives. It has quite a lot of, it has more connectives because it combines the alethic and the temporal ideas into single connectives. Like there's a connective for saying that some situation will happen in the future on every possible way that the world will develop. That's one connect. There's a connective for saying that on every branch of possibility, something is going to eventually happen. And there's another connective for saying that there is some branch on the future, or some possible branch of possibility on which something will eventually happen. And there's a bunch of other connectives for saying things are always going to be true along all possible possibilities, and something is going to be true along eventually at all possibilities. So the Peircean approach gets quite complicated in terms of the syntax, and luckily we're going to not look at that. So if we move to the Occamist approach for historical necessity, the picture we have is of time going up. Here on my diagram, time is going to the future, time is going up into the future, and we've got several possibilities that are being considered. This was a concern of Aristotle several thousand years ago about whether if there was going to be a sea battle, whether it was necessary or not. And let's suppose that we're at that time that I've indicated as now. The Occamist approach will ask that before you can make a statement, or as part of you making a statement about possibilities in the future now, you have to be thinking about a particular history. A history being the whole of time, a possible way that the whole of time develops. So a history might be like history A, it's a particular branch going off into the future. And as we said, because we're talking about historical necessity where the past is fixed, we don't have branching towards the future, past, we just have branching towards the future. So a history is one of those maximal branches. And on history A, and also the other history that hasn't got a name next to it, there's a sea battle happening. on history B and the other history over there, there's no C battles ever. So, if we're thinking about what's true now, in an optimist approach to historical necessity, we have to be thinking about which branch we're on as well as where we are in time. So, for me to say there will be a sea battle but it's not necessary, that suggests that I might be on, at that time point, but on history A that I'm thinking. So I'm saying, I'm going out on a limb, I'm saying amongst all the possibilities, there is the one that will have the possibility, the branch of history that will occur is one in which there is a sea battle in the future. There will be a sea battle, but it's not necessary. Why? Because I'm also entertaining the other possibilities that as possibilities, as possible futures that might develop, but I'm not thinking that I'm making a prediction to some extent that it's going to be, for example, history A. Whereas if I was thinking that history B was the way things will develop, I will say there will not be a sea battle, but it is possible. Okay, so that's a typical, that's the kind of situation you have in an optimist approach to historical necessity. You have the branches, but you do your evaluation of sentences, of propositions on particular branches. Okay, so how do we get, if we're going to start to formalise this sort of approach, we will get a little formal and introduce some formal syntax. Apologies for non-symbolic logicians here, but there's going to be symbols now. So we suppose we're dealing with propositional temporal logic. We're abstracting away time and the world to a bunch of accountable set of propositions, things that could be true now or false now, and maybe true or false, differently true or false at a different time. These are the basic propositions. And we build up our formulas by starting with the propositions, the atoms, I'll call them atoms, atomic propositions, and using classical connectives such as negation and conjunction, temporal connectives, and I'll give you the semantics of them in a moment, but these are priors temporal connectives. H for has always been the case, something that's been true forever in the past. That's what H alpha is indicating, that alpha has been true in the past. And G alpha, meaning for going to always be the case, so alpha is true at all times in the future. There's some other connectives or priors that we can introduce, that I'll introduce on the next slide as abbreviations in terms of these. And the alethic connective of necessity we'll use as a box. We'll use a box to represent that, to show that something alpha is necessary. We'll say what that means. And then you can build up more complicated formal representations of propositions like it's always has been the case that it's always will be the case that is true, and it's not necessary that P will always be true, is an English rendering of that more complicated sentence. There's a lot of other symbols you can bring in conveniently. There's all the abbreviations of classical propositional logic, or implies, if and only if, truth, falsity. There are temporal abbreviations, priors F and P. F for it will be the case that something is true, so something will be true at least at one instant in the future, that's F of alpha. And that's, you can introduce this as an abbreviation in terms of G. It's not the case that it's always going to be not alpha. Okay, so there is at least one time when alpha is true. Was, or P, that's priors P alpha, means there is a time in the past where alpha, at least one time in the past when alpha is true. We can have other abbreviations occasionally useful, like alpha is true at all times, A alpha. Alpha is true at some time, E alpha. And possibility is an abbreviation, can be introduced as an abbreviation in terms of necessity. Alpha is possible if it's not the case that it's necessary that not alpha holds. If we get up to my axioms later, there's you can also sometimes find useful non-strict versions of some of these connected, so that include the present moment. So a non-strict always includes the present moment, because as we'll see in the semantics in a minute, G alpha doesn't really include the present moment, and non-strict will be also allows alpha to be true now to make it true. And if you want to consider other models of the time flow other than continuous ones, well, no, even if you want to consider that, you sometimes put in there's extra connectives that are particularly useful in computer, not seen so much in philosophy, but in linguistics and in computer science, until and since play a big role. And there's also some other operators to do with, which we can call K or C. K is an abbreviation for, in dense time, K alpha means alpha is true arbitrarily soon after now. K plus alpha means alpha is true. Any time you go after now, you will have passed the time when alpha is true. And C plus alpha means alpha is going to be true for a little while after now, constantly true for a little while. And X is, if you've got discrete times, X is often talking about the next state of time. So what are the semantics? Okay, let's introduce be a bit more formal with our semantic structures. As you saw from that example with the C battles, we're looking at tree-shaped models of time. And we'll have a tree frame, which is a pair consisting of a set of time points and a binary relation of past and future relation between time points, less than, which is error-reflexive, it's strictly less than, so a time point is not less than itself, and time being before in time is transitive. It's linear towards the past, so if you go back in time from a particular point in time and you have two other points in time that are both before the current point of time, then one of them has got to be before the other. So past is linear, as you'd expect from if we have a necessity of the past. And it's also useful to suppose that the tree, we don't have a forest, we don't have a forest of trees, we just have an individual tree. So there's connectedness between any 2 points. You can find a point that's less than both of them. So that's a tree, that's the frame on which we put that models our time. To have a structure in which the propositions are true or false, we also need to have a valuation map which tells us which propositions are true at points of time. So H will tell us, H of P will tell us the points of time where P is true. Okay, so once you have a T, a less than defined and an H, then you have a structure on which you can talk about things changing in time. As I mentioned before, where it's important for the Occamist approach to talk about histories. Histories are maximally linear subsets of the tree. So they extend as far as they can in the past and as far as you can in the future while staying linear. So one of the branches all the way through. I'm happy to be interrupted with questions and comments if anybody wants to, but there will be a little bit of time at the end as well. Okay, so far? Am I going too slow? Yes. Semantics. Okay, so here, as I've said, you need to talk about whether something, a proposition, a formula is true or false. You need to have a place where you're evaluating that. It varies on what history you're on, what point you're talking about, obviously what structure you're in. So we need to fix a triple. Which structure we're talking about, T, which branch or history, that we're evaluating on, and which time point on that history. Okay, so the structure, the history, and the time point. Only when you've specified all of those can we say whether these formulas are true or not. And here's the ASCII semantics for that, the truth there. Okay, so for a proposition, we go and look up to see whether the time point that we're evaluating at is in the set corresponding to that proposition P, the places where P is true. So if X is one of the places where P is true, then yes, we'll say P is true at time X. Notice, it doesn't depend on what history you're in. So atomic propositions, like the sea battle occurring or not, if the sea battle is occurring now, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at history A or history B into the future. The sea battle is occurring now, the sea battle is occurring. So that is true regardless of the history. Negation is, as you'd expect, negation of alpha is going to be true when alpha is not. Conjunction when they're both true. G alpha, going to always be the case, means that for every y which is greater than x inside sigma, so we're only looking at y's in the history that you've mentioned. So only looking at points in the future of x, but in the history sigma. If they all satisfy alpha, then G alpha is true at x. Okay, so G alpha is only restricted to going along the same history that you've specified in the evaluation. And the same with H alpha. We obviously go back along that history, but there it doesn't matter because all the histories have the same path from all the histories which include a certain point will have the same path going back from there. Does it matter? I just said it doesn't matter, but I'm wrong. It does matter because some of those alphas that were back in the past, if you evaluated, some of them might be complicated formulas to do with other histories that go off into a different future. So you have to be careful with that as well. And what does alpha being necessary mean? Okay, well, when is that true? Well, that's true at a time point in a history in a structure if every history that contains X makes alpha true. So if all of the histories that go through the time point all had sea battles in the future, then we would say that a future sea battle was necessary at that time point on that history. Okay? So that's why in that picture that I showed you a few slides ago, we would say that the sea battle wasn't necessary because there were other histories going through there which didn't have sea battles. So we don't say that a sea battle is necessary. Okay, so there's a basic framework for a an Occamist version of a historical necessity logic. There's still lots of variations within that. You can restrict your attention only to some subclasses of tree structures. You might vary the semantics a bit, and you might vary the language. So even within what I presented, we can make some variations. For example, you might only stick to discrete time trees with height omega. So every branch could start at a point 0 and then have its own point 1, 2, 3, etc. up to anything less than omega. And that's a typical restriction that we make in computer science. And these sorts of Occamist trees correspond of discrete with height omega correspond to a very important computer science language called CTL star, which has serious applications in verification of hardware and software. In fact, where I work over the road is a research office at Motorola. Motorola use CTL star to check that their controllers for making car windows going up and down do the right thing and don't cut people's arms off, which is a useful controller to have, a check to have on your controllers for things. So these logics are practically important as well. You might suppose that there's no endpoints to time, so branches go on forever and go back in the past forever without there being a final point. You might suppose that the time flows at debts, and for us we will think we want to concentrate on the case eventually where the time points, where the flows of time are continuous, by which I mean like the real numbers, dense, complete, etc. without equals. How else can you vary working with these sorts of logics? You can introduce some more expressive connectives like until and since. And one of the main things that we're interested in about formulas in these logics is whether they might be valid or satisfiable. And this is what we mean here. We'll say a formula is satisfiable if you can find some structure and with some history through it and some time point where that formula is true. So phi is true at those, then phi is a satisfiable formula in such a logic. And phi is valid, on the other hand, if it's always true in any kind of structure you make in your logic, which is in the logic, and any history through that structure and all points on sigma, if phi is true, then we'll say phi is valid. That's the semantic definitions of satisfiability and validity. Obviously, we're going to be interested in seeing if we can find some proof theoretic, syntactic approaches to identifying validity. These are related. If you want to know whether something's satisfiable, you can look to see whether the negation is valid or not. If the negation is valid, then the formula is not satisfiable. If the negation is not valid, then the formula is satisfiable. So finding some way, axiom system or some algorithm to decide validity also gives you easily a way to decide satisfiability as well. And to test our understanding of these logics, we can think about whether some of these formulas are valid or not. But I won't get people working there so early in the morning before lunch. So I'll go through these then. As a proposition, if P is true, does that mean it's necessary that always in the future you can go back in the past and find P true? I saw some nodding heads there, so yes, that's right. That's a valid formula. Okay, so P being true means on all branches as you go into the future you can always look back and see a place where P is true. Okay, that's going to happen in the tree. What about, is it always, if it's always the case that it's always the case that P is true, is that going to mean that P is always true in the future among any branch? Yes, that's valid as well. That comes out of the transitivity of your time flows. If P is true, is it always the case that if actually in the past P, that's like this one, that is valid? What about if there is a sea battle, does that mean that it's necessary that there is a sea battle?
No. No, the second one is not.
This one?
The second one.
This one?
For density.
This is
density.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well picked up. Yes, the other way around, GP implies GGP is transitivity. GGP implies GP is indeed density. You can get to something in 2 steps, but it's always going to be true. Okay, let's continue. What about this one? If there is a sea battle, is it necessary that there is a sea battle? Yes, this is valid as well. This comes out from the fact that the sea battle going on now will be going on in all branches that go through that same point because the propositions are evaluated at the points in time. What about if another formula is true, some other general formula, alpha is true, does that make it necessarily true? No, because if we look at this next example, just because this is also not valid, just because F alpha is true on the particular branch, so if there is a C battle on this branch, it doesn't mean that it's necessary that in the future there will be C battles, okay? So this is invalid, and that's an example of, if we put P for C battles in here, that would be an example to show that that's not valid either. What about this one? If in the past a proposition was necessary, does that imply that there are all branches in the past that proposition held? Yes. If it was necessary, then it was true. It means that you go back in the past, then on all branches going through that past point, alpha was true. That means on all branches going through the current point, if you go back in the past to them, they all include that same past point. So alpha will be true. And this is a scary one. This is always false. You don't want to be around when that happens. That's the end of time. And that, you hope, is not valid, because then every time is the end of time, and obviously that's not true. Is it even satisfiable? It can be satisfiable in a general Occam's situation. You can have a branch of time that ends at a point, and at that point there's no future. Okay, so every point that is in the future, which there aren't any, will make falsity true. But if we imagine time is continuous like the real numbers, then we're not going to get into that situation. So that depending exactly on which exactly variant of the logic you're looking at, this could be satisfiable or not. Okay, now here's another interesting formula, and maybe 10 minutes. Let's switch.
10 minutes. Yes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes to switch to questions. Okay, fine. Let's go quick. I'll speed up a little bit. I'm still not going to get through everything, but that's okay. Here's another interesting formula. This is crucial for the problems with getting axiomatic completeness situations. This is sort of a bit like an induction. It's saying that it's necessary, if it is, let's suppose that it's necessary that always, so just everywhere in the tree above now, whenever it rains, then it's possible that it will rain in the future. Okay, let's suppose that happens always. Whenever it's raining, this always happens to me when I come to Moscow, it's always raining, so I believe this might come, I'm certainly happy to come to Moscow again another time, and therefore it's probably possible it will rain again for everybody. Sorry about that. Let's suppose that was true, that rain always brought about the possibility of future rain. Then, is there some branch through history where you can always find rain followed by more rain? When there is rain in the future. And yes, that's valid. Okay, you can go through, if whenever there is rain, there's some rain on another branch, you can make a new branch that goes through rain. Okay, if you like rain that much, you can find and choose to go through a life that takes you constantly back to rain and rain and rain and rain. Okay. I don't recommend doing this, but that's possible. So this is to justify that this is valid. You can look at finding unbounded increasing sequences of points. It's not exactly the same, but you can make a proof of soundness based on that. You can make a history that includes all of those points. And that's clearly some sort of induction, especially if you were talking about discrete natural numbers time, that's clearly some sort of induction reasoning. But in general, that sort of property is called limit closure. In computer science, that comes out of the idea that the step-by-step construction of a branch through time is called a limit closure property. And people have struggled for years with making limit closure axioms. Oh, well, there's been lots of suggestions of limit closure axioms that capture the full generality of that kind of property. We haven't got time to go through them all, and some of them involve extra symbols that we haven't looked at, but in computer science that comes up a lot, that you can inductively build a possible branch through time if you're guaranteed to go from one state to another. And there's quite a complicated one that I used for historical necessity some years ago. So there's lots of axioms for that kind of property. So it can be generalized in lots of ways, And the other thing that's been noticed about limit closure sorts of properties is that they are often quite hard to use in your axiomatic completeness proofs. So it is intuitive that you can build a path through time in that sort of way, but it's come to be thought of a bit of as a notorious property for logicians to have limit closure. So for many years, people gave up on trying to incorporate limit closure into doing proof theoretic versions of historical necessity. And they created things that have come to be known as bundled semantics. And this is the idea of having a fixed bunch or bundle of histories given as part of the semantics. So we make our semantics even more complicated, all because we don't want to have extra histories being constructed in this kind of inductive way. And then it turns out that these are easier to axiomatize. And so because I'm running out of time, I won't go into the great details of this, but you can see that here, the bundled semantics for a historical necessity kind of logic includes an extra item in the structure, which is a set of histories. So V is called a bundle, and if it is a set of histories, not all, so it might be a subset, it might be not all of them, such that at every time point is included in at least one history. And then you have a bundled structure. As part of the definition of the structure, we fix the bundle. And how does the semantics change? Well, it looks all very similar, doesn't it? But there is a little bit which is different. In the definition of necessity, the semantics for necessity operator only limits you to checking other histories that are in the bundle. So we don't count all possible history, we don't look at all possible histories through time, we only look at the ones that are in the bundle, in that fixed bundle that is fixed as part of the semantic. Okay, so you can't just make up, you can't assume that if you make up a new history step by step, that it's going to be in the bundle, so it might not therefore be part of the semantics of the necessity operator or the possibility operator. And another interesting connection that has been noticed with bundled semantics is that they correspond to a completely different semantics for historical necessity logics, which are called now called camp frames. And this is the idea that, okay, so here's our historical necessity model with a very few number of points, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, going off to the future like this. And remember that the formulas that are true at time A, there's actually different sets of formulas true at time A because it depends on what history you're on as well. So there's a set of formulas that are true at time A on this history, and also another set that might be slightly different on that history, and another on that history, and another on this history. So there's actually, if that's 1, 2, 3, 4 different histories in there. There's really 4 different sets of formulas, which can be the formulas that are true at A, depending on which history you are. And the idea of a camp frame is to spread that out and separate that into 4 versions of the point A. So we break it up. There's A on the history 1, there's A on history 2, A on history 3, A on history 4. And we introduce a new accessibility relation as well as the temporal accessibility relation. There is an S5 type relation between between points that are actually the same time point but are on different histories. And we make a new structure like that. And if you make a structure like that, then it turns out you get something that's quite easily seen to be the same as the bundled semantics. And the correspondence between the tree and the camp frame doesn't always work. If we look at this example. In this example, if you imagine that there's sea battles all the way along, but they possibly finish at any stage. So there's a sea battle now, but on this branch it finishes. But on this branch, there's a sea battle tomorrow, and then it finishes. On this branch, There's a sea battle lasting for 3 days and then it finishes. Okay? And there are branches corresponding to every finite number of days of sea battles, but there isn't really a branch. I mean, we can see that there is a branch where sea battles go on forever, but there isn't really one in the count frame. So the correspondence between the count frame and an actual tree falls down if the count frame doesn't have an explicit branch for that branch which has emerged. They're called emergent histories. So that shows there's different semantics. The count frames are actually having the bundled semantics, and this is the full semantics. Okay, I'm going to speed up a little bit and just say there are some useful operations there's some useful uses for bundled logics, even though they let us down and don't have limit closure formulas. Okay, so limit closure formulas are generally not valid in the bundled logics. So we don't have to reason about them, they suddenly become invalid. Okay, so because you can't construct history step by step. So they have been used over the last 20, 30 years. Bundled semantics have been used to give preliminary axiom systems for the bundled versions of the logics. And for example, they gave, and they've also been used to give fast or easy reasoning systems for computer science type temporal logics. E.g., for example, there's a much faster algorithm for deciding bundled CTL star as there is for CTL star. They also, another advantage, which I won't go into, is something in computer science called fairness properties, where you don't allow every possible, even though a computation might have possible steps, we don't allow every possible sequence of possible computations. We must let some other computations and events happen every so often. For example, if you're a printer, you don't always print out the jobs of the chair of the head of department. You must let other academics also have their print jobs occasionally printed out on the printer and things like that. Okay. So the fairness properties sometimes can be implemented well with bundled logics, but they're not the natural logics. Okay, so a summary of existing complete axiom systems, including bundled ones. There's some logics which don't have serious limit closure properties that were axiomatized very early. There's bundled versions you can see that were advertised from the 90s. And the harder logics, with the limit closure properties, are only axiomatized in the last 20 years or so. So let's quickly go to what are the axioms that I'm proposing for historical necessity. Obviously modus ponens, and also any propositional tautology you can use as an axiom. You must have that in somehow, or equivalently a bunch of axioms that give you everything in propositional classical logic. You can have rules for G and H as if it was linear order. So that's just the normal rules for G and H in linear orders. You also should have some rules for continuity if you're proposing that time is continuous. So you need one for density, and also which is similar to the one we had earlier, and also one for dedicated completeness, which means there are no gaps in time. We haven't got time to go into that. We haven't got any gaps to fill, unfortunately, and no endpoints. We also need basic axioms for the alethic modality by itself, so a generalization rule and S5 type rules. We need one or possibly more, and I haven't chosen exactly which ones to use yet in my system, but they're all interderivable, but here's one. If something's in the past, then it's necessary that it was possible in the past. Atomic propositions have their own necessity. We don't need this if you've got continuous time, but if you have got possible endpoints, you need something called maximality of histories, which I won't go into. You've got summaries. You've got traditional rules, but notice the substitution rule is the traditional substitution rule for modal logics is not valid in CTL historical necessity logics because of this, because of propositions, because of an example we saw before. Propositions being true can become necessary, but other formulas aren't. We also use a tricky rule called the Gabai's reflexivity rule, which I won't go into, but that helps with giving names for points. There are some alternatives, but that makes things easier. And we won't use that limit closure rule, but we use a new one which is fairly scary, but that's what I advertise. So I better spend a bit of time going through this one. What does this say? This is my latest. This is a simplified version of the latest rule I want to use because I'm trying to write this big axiomatic completeness proof, and I keep finding shortcuts. And this one, I think, even though it's a long formula and very scary to look at, I think it will help me. So what is it saying? Okay, so it's a version of limit closure rule. It's saying that, again, we have this situation where when it rains, it's always possible that it will rain again in the future. So let's suppose that's true. Now, what does that say? What does that imply? That implies that it's necessary that if it was raining, then there must be a path through time where rain is followed, where every rain is followed by more rain in the future. We've already had that. That's been part of those other rules we've looked at. But what more can you say? You can also say that either the rain goes on forever until the end of time, that there's always a rainier time later, or there's some time in the future where it's necessary that it's always sunny. So you run out of rain completely on all possibilities. So this is a new addition to the limit closure idea, is that you can actually choose a path through time where either the rain, which keeps rain being followed by more rain that you're building, either that goes on forever until the end of time, or there's a whole possible branching world going out from a time when we never have rain again. Okay, we finished with rain altogether, which is a very strange and interesting situation, but it actually turns out useful in axiomatic completeness. So that's the exciting new axiom I wanted to share with you, which is a strange situation that you could make such a claim about time. I won't go through how the completeness proof goes. It has some very tricky stuff, including something called banning, which is changing your mind about, as you go, you change your mind about what's true at time to ban some properties from turning up ever again if they're not necessary. If they're not necessary to come up again, then you introduce a rule that they will never happen again. And this gets rid of some of the randomness in these constructions, step-by-step constructions. Okay, so I have to wind up. So I've given you a conclusion, overview of optimist branching time logics, sketch of well, that was very sketchy. That was probably too sketchy. What's future work? Okay, there's something called we've dealt with the assumption of atomic non-futurity, which is a very tongue-twisting thing to have to say, but it's the assumption that if propositions are true at a time, then they're true on all branches at that time. There's another variation of historical necessity logic which allows you to have propositions that are true or false depending on, at a certain time, depending on which branch of time. For example, I could be choosing to stop talking. Okay, so at that time I could be choosing to stop talking, and actually on one branch I had chosen to stop talking, and another branch I continue on talking. So there is another variation of this logic where we don't have to impose that strict idea that propositions only agree across all the time. What else can you do? Axiomatize until it's sense, and also computer scientists are interested in complexity and decision procedures. And otherwise, I will leave you with a picture of my sunny university, which at the moment is the middle of winter in my university, and it's 20 degrees. It's 20 degrees and sunny, so I thought I'd make you a little bit jealous about that, but sorry. Yes. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Совсем много времени на вопросы. Только кратко формулируйте.
So can this logic be made infinitary? So I mean that if we put now the limit to the length of these branches and histories, do we have to make the logic infinitary, or we can put up with the integer version?
Okay, so you're asking about putting a maximum length of branch.
Yes, like not in omega, but I don't know, epsilon 0 or something like that. And in this case, do we need infinitary logic, or we can still have this?
Sorry, so the length is, do we have a discrete, do we have discrete time points?
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, so I haven't thought about a finite, it's really a finite version of the logic then, if we only have finite lengths of branches.
If we have infinite, do we need to also introduce infinite formulas and proofs?
I think even in the finite case you will have, well no, here we have infinite, possibly infinite lengths of, including longer than countable lengths of branches, but we don't have to have infinite length formulas.
Может, еще у кого-то вопрос есть? Нет вопросов? Ну, давайте еще раз.